Alright, good evening everyone. This is Chris from Almost Legit Garage. You can tell by my hands because that's all you're going to see in this video because I'm trying the whole chest mount thing. So disembodied hands aside, as you saw from the title of this video, we're going to be exploring if the 4L60E, which I have in pieces here, is actually any good or not. So before we get to the conclusion, let's talk about some of the stuff and why it is good or not good, how it compares, and how it stacks up to everything else. Alright, so as everybody knows, automatic transmissions have clutches except for CVTs, but that's an entirely different subject. So one of the main factors to how much power a transmission can hold is the size of the frictions. Size and number. So here are some examples of the size of the frictions inside the 4L60E. As you can see, they're relatively thin. These are the reverse clutches. Go in this drum. So those are, they're fairly thin. These are your third and fourth gear clutches. These are the ones that are pretty much always cooked on a high mileage transmission. Especially if it has, that particular problem. But as you can see, they're kind of thin again. Now you'll notice these have a different color. These are what they call the high energy frictions. So they're a little bit grippier of a material. They're like a sintered, or sintered as they call it, material. So it's a little bit grippier of a material, but there's still not a whole lot of it. This one currently has the factory 6 clutches in it. You can configure them to get anywhere from 6 to 9 clutches. I haven't really played with the 9 clutch stack, but it is available for high performance applications where these are having trouble with slipping, but normally 7 or 8 will do it for anything relatively sane for a 4L60E. Now here is the low reverse clutch. Sorry I baked this one being an idiot. But anyways, it's again relatively thin. I think there are 5 of those. So you really you don't have a whole lot of friction surface inside of a 4L60E. So how do you combat that in a performance situation? Well, you increase the line pressure. So more pressure clamps these together more, and you can hold more capacity. But as I'm going to kind of show you, kind of one of the flaws of that logic. Well, as soon as I get the snap ring back on, but that's back on. Now, as you can kind of see, or can't really see, but I'll explain. There's these pistons with little fingers. You can kind of see them if I can line this up right through the holes in the side, but that's kind of like these fingers that come up, and then they push on this heavy metal plate down here at the bottom of the stack of clutches. So that then squeezes against this top plate, and that's how you engage your clutches. So it'll kind of squeeze together. I'm not sure if you guys can try to aim the movement there, but that's how that works. One of the unfortunate things about it is it's held in with a snap ring. So basically the outside secured, but the inside can move. So you'll see when these are really cooked, all the metals will be warped warped outward because of all the pressure pushing there, and the only place to stop it is on the outside edge. They make an upgrade drum that has a screw-down plate for there, but it's rather expensive. So that's really out of the realm of this transmission, because it is a pretty hefty upgrade. So as you can see, friction's kind of small on this. Next problem, I mentioned the higher line pressure to get more holding capacity out of it. Well, unfortunately, one of the kind of Achilles heel of the 4L60E, in my opinion, I think this is where a lot of the problems come from. I'm not sure if experts agree with my opinion or not. But you can kind of see in here, there's kind of that sheen around these holes. Well, these are where the check balls ride in here. And over time, as the check ball hits and hits and hits and hits and hits, it kind of opens that up and opens it up, and you'll get like a check ball stuck in there, or it'll kind of waller out the hole and it won't seal properly, and that's usually where your frictions come in, or your frictions burn up. I believe is from those holes getting wallered out, or the check balls getting stuck, or whatever it happens to be. So when that happens, obviously you're burning up your frictions. When you try to do a performance build and raise the line pressures and that stuff, that's just going to happen faster. I know normally they sell a shift kit as extends the life of the transmission, but really that's garbage in my opinion, at least in this context. That will cause, or higher line pressure will cause a failure faster. It just makes sense. So moving on, moving on, I'm going to show you the Planetary Gears. Okay, so here is your Planetary Gear. Now this is, I believe, the one that does overdrive. But anyways, as you can see, there are only 4 pinion elements to it, and it's relatively small. Now, although these don't tend to have too many problems in any sensible horsepower numbers, if you look at a 4L80 transmission, which is their heavy-duty version, there are 6 pinion planets just to begin with. So a lot tougher, a lot stouter to begin with. In the 4L65, which is the slight upgrade to the 4L60, they did 5 pinions. Which gives you spreads out the load and gives you a little bit more holding capacity, theoretically at least. And then I will show you the other Planetary Gear is roughly the same size. So this is all kind of small relatively in the transmission world. It is a light duty transmission, so that's kind of par for the course. Next, I want to show you guys the output shaft. This is another limiting factor, and you wouldn't really think it, because it seems like a pretty darn stout piece of metal, but I've actually broken one of these before with my Avalanche. So they're not exactly as indestructible as you would think. Normally they snap right through this hole here, and it'll break through that hole. The center is hollow, and the hole goes through halfway, so you kind of create a weak link from just the design of that. So this should have been a little bit heftier, bigger, round, fatter of a shaft, but that didn't happen. But I mean, it's all about context, people. So when you ask, is the 4L60E good or not good, I showed you some of the downsides of it, but in reality, for the application, it is great. It is a great transmission, in my opinion. I mean, you don't really see too many, I would say crib deaths, just something that happened really early for no apparent reason. You'll see a lot of that in like Jeeps or kind of the Chrysler family. And I think that's really coming down to Jeep bargaining down to a price. Now, don't quote me on that. I haven't really done much more than been around people who have put a lot of money into their Jeep transmissions. But anyways, so that's really kind of the thing, is they don't really fail out of the blue like other transmissions. I mean, if you treat one well, they will service a long time for you, and that's number 1 criteria to what makes a good transmission. Number 2, is it economical? Now, economical with a transmission, what do you mean? It comes with the car. Well, the transmissions are economical in 2 ways. Number 1, does it allow the vehicle to get good gas mileage? And yeah, it's actually a pretty lightweight, compact version of a rear-wheel drive transmission. You don't have a whole lot of revolving weight, so that helps out with the fuel economy. The gearing is relatively appropriate for a for the application. So yes, it's a pretty economical transmission that way. Number 2, when it does break, is it cheap to fix? Well, here's an example. This whole transmission, to rebuild and do some upgrades and stuff like that, was only about $300. So you think about it, you pay a transmission shop $500 for the pleasure of taking everything apart and changing everything and putting it back together, and then you pay $300 in materials, and you should be able to get a transmission for about 800, or transmission rebuilt for about $800. Or you can be adventurous like myself and do it yourself for about $300. So that's a pretty good deal for transmission. Nothing in here is too exotic or anything like that. I know with the CVTs coming around, and that's an entirely different subject, but with CVTs coming around, when they need to be fixed, it is very, very prohibitively expensive. I was looking into the Volkswagen ones, and just to replace the belt, because if you kind of know about CVTs, it's like a snowmobile clutch, or a snowmobile transmission, which is just clutches, where you have a belt, and depending on the RPMs, the belt moves down over here and up over here and that kind of thing. So one pulley gets bigger, one pulley shrinks, essentially. But the belt in the middle on a snowmobile, of course, is rubber, so it's not, you know, horrifically expensive. But on a CVT transmission for a car, it's this kind of like braided steel belt. And when they go, obviously the car is not going to move anymore. But to change that at a minimum is about $2,500. So that's prohibitively expensive, and a car, by the time it happens, is only really going to be worth like $4,000 or $5,000. So are you going to really put, you know, probably, you know, $2,500 to $4,000, depending on, you know, what you can find, what else is wrong with it, to get that car fixed? Not really. They're just going to kind of go away. Or you're going to try to put a used transmission in, and anything that's relatively failure prone and high technology like a CVT transmission is going to be expensive. Now, you can pick these things up because they came in pretty much anything that's rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive in GM's, or rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, some all-wheel drive in GM's repertoire. You can pick these things up for about, you know, $200-300 for a high mileage one that still works. So, you know, if you decide you just want to swap one in, see how much more life you can get out of it, it's, you know, a relatively economical package. So I've done that on my old Silverado was that way. We just got a used transmission, threw it back together, and it's been running for an extra 30,000 miles and still is going. So we'll see how long it lasted. But that's kind of the thing about them, is they're available, they're cheap to work on. Everything about them is generally a pretty good thing. The only bad thing is that depending on how you drive them, they might get lower miles. So my dad had a truck with 240,000 miles on it. The transmission shifted fine. This Trailblazer that I've been working on, sorry about flashing you with the lights, only has 140,000 miles, and it managed to fail. Back at it. So this one only had 140,000 miles, and it managed to fail. And that really comes down to the way you drive it, for the most part. So, like I showed you, these are the third and fourth gear clutches. So when it engages third gear, these lock up. Well, depending on how aggressively you're, you know, getting up to speed, third gear might happen at higher RPMs, you know, with a fair amount of power flowing through the transmission. So it really depends on how you drive it, on how long these clutches are going to last, you know, by their own account. There's only so much that a factory transmission can deal with as far as like shifting and that stuff, like RPMs. It's kind of like a clutch in a manual transmission, if you think about it. I don't know how many people out there drive a manual, but you've been kind of told that that riding, the longer you stay on the clutch, the shorter amount of time it's going to last. But it depends on whether or not you're stepping on the gas, getting everything spinning faster. If you wanted to, you could take off with a manual transmission car without using the gas every time, and it's going to last pretty much as long as if you use the gas and got out of the clutch rather quickly. It's equivalent wear. So if these aren't engaged at a higher RPM, an aggressive shift, for the majority of their life, they're going to last longer. So you'll see a lot of cars that reside in cities that get a little bit less life out of their transmissions because of that. But that's really comes down to, how you take care of things and too much. And I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't be able to just break a car, especially something with an automatic, just because you stepped on the gas too hard. But it does shorten the life. We know that about everything. If you launch with a stick shift car aggressively a bunch, you shorten the life of the clutch. That's just the way it works. So down to the verdict. I'm going to say it's a great transmission depending on who you are. So I'm going to kind of tell you an example of the transmission in my Avalanche, which is kind of the majority of my transmission experience. And if this is a kind of a story that a lot of people haven't heard on the channel, so I bought the truck with a supercharger on it. So it had a MP122 supercharger on it. I was thinking that was on a 5.3 liter like it comes with, but turns out it was on a 6 liter truck, or on a 6 liter engine. So basically on gasoline, you're talking about a 500 horsepower engine, somewhere around those parts. The transmission that came in it was originally built by ATS. It was a stage 2 or stage 2 plus or something around that level of build. Normally they're rated for about 450 horsepower, probably what the truck put to the ground. The separator plate, like I talked about, it had worn out the holes, so it burnt up the band here. So I took it out and I rebuilt it. So new band, a couple other bulletproofing things, a couple new clutches, just depending on what they looked like. Anyways, I threw it back in, and I drove the car for another like 12,000 miles. It was fine. It shifted fine. It did everything fine. At that horsepower level, that transmission was perfectly happy, perfectly suited for the truck. Then I got the idea in my brain, well, I'm going to switch to E85. It's going to get a little more power, and it's going to be a little bit cheaper than buying premium for the thing. So I got new injectors, and I switched to E85, or switched to E85. It's a flex fuel, so you can put either in. But I started running E85 in it. Well, E85 on a supercharged engine is going to yield you about another 80 to 100 horsepower. Well, that transmission, of course, couldn't take another 80 to 100 horsepower because I'm going to tell you a 4L60E is named that way because it is a 4-speed, longitudinally mounted, and can take about 600 foot-pounds of torque without burning up or without breaking the internal components. And I ended up breaking the output shaft. This big hefty shaft ended up breaking. So I decided, you know what, all right, it was just the output shaft. I'll rebuild it again, and I'll put it back in, and I'll put an upgraded output shaft in, and it won't be that big of a problem. I'm still, at this point, I didn't realize it was a 6 liter, and I didn't realize it was the bigger supercharger, so I'm kind of aiming it in the 500 horsepower range, where it was perfectly happy before, where the transmission worked perfectly fine before. So I rebuilt it, I put the upgraded output shaft in it, and then shortly after I ended up slightly off-road, had to use reverse aggressively, and it decided to break the, let's see, grab one right here so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. It decided to break the sprag. So a sprag is kind of a one-way clutch. So you can see this will spin that way, and don't worry, that shrieking sound is normal, but it won't spin the other way. So this is part of what allows reverse to work, I believe at least. But anyways, this component couldn't handle the high horsepower being put through reverse. Now normally most people don't use reverse aggressively, but in the context of, getting stuck, you kind of have to. So put that back together. So I ended up breaking that, and when in the process of breaking that, it took out the rear planetary gears and the sun shell and the output shaft And basically, it took out everything from the back of the from the transmission, or from the middle of the transmission back. Packed the clutches full of metal shavings and debris and all that stuff. So pretty much at this point, what I ended up doing was a, just stockish rebuild with the junk transmission I had laying around. I literally scribed the metal shavings out of the clutches and threw it back together, and it's been driving around like that. But I ended up taking the supercharger off so it can be happy. Even at that point, a 6-liter Ron E85 is going to be pushing about 400 horsepower, still back within the realm of reasonable horsepower for one of these transmissions. Now you can push them a little bit past their torque rating if you're not really the most demanding application. So a big heavy truck with biggish tires and a heavy duty axle and all of that stuff is too much for one at 500-600 horsepower, in that kind of range. So just, it's all about what you want to put into it, what you want to put into it, what you want to get out of it. So stock form, I say they're a perfectly fine transmission. There are some early casualties, but it happens. It's going to happen in pretty much any world. But ultimately, it's still a very good option for 99.9% of the people out there. Now, transmission shops make a lot of money on this transmission because it's in everything. And it does have its own, systematic failures that we're kind of familiar with. I kind of talked about them. But ultimately, it's not something that just breaks out of the blue. It can handle a fair amount of power, as I said, with a little bit of valve body work and a few minor components. The thing's able to hold up to, about 500 wheel horsepower, or 500 crank or wheel horsepower, somewhere in that range. No problem. That's what it's rated for. But if you exceed that rating, you're going to spend a lot of money trying to get every component in this to work. In my case, I'm going to switch to the larger 4L80 transmission. I happen to have one right here that I need to rebuild before I can use, but that is more capable of holding the torque that I need. Obviously, it's a 4L80, and like I said, the 60 is rated for 600 foot-pounds of torque. The 80 is rated for about 800 foot-pounds of torque. So it should be plenty for my application until I get nutty and do something else to it. But anyways, that's kind of my opinion of the 4L60E. If you're under 450 horsepower and you don't mind putting a little bit of work into it, they're a fine transmission. There's nothing wrong with them. They do their thing. They do their thing, and they do their thing relatively well. And if you have to do one of these, at least it's not going to, or you have to do kind of this thing, it doesn't really cost you that much. But if you're over 500, 600 horsepower, you're gonna just want to steer clear. Move on to something else. Move on to an 80 if you can. I know Corvettes don't really have an option, but if you have the option, go to something a little bit heavier duty. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I hope this video was informative for you. I don't like to do a whole bunch of transmission videos, but that seems to be the work that I'm getting right now. I foolishly decided to buy a truck to fix and sell that needed a transmission, and here I am. But that kind of the overview of it and what I think of it, and it's not, there's really not much to complain about with it, as long as you keep it reasonable. I know a lot of people hate them because they've had problems, but you're gonna have problems no matter what vehicle you're in. At least when you have problems with one of these, they're cheap problems, and cheap is relative, but it doesn't really cost a whole lot. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, mention, or say something in the comment section, throw a thumbs up in there so I know, hey, they kind of like the benchtop overview, tear apart, show you some stuff, kind of review instead of me just talking about what I'm doing. I also do some DIYs. Let me know if you want to see those. But also, subscribe, because I'm trying to get a little bit more content out there. I'm going to try to do more of whatever you guys like. We'll have some mods coming in the future, so stick around. Like I said, subscribe and you'll see what we're up to. This is Chris from Almost Legit Garage, and go out and fix something. See you guys later.